Hello, good evening, or good afternoon. It depends on your time belt. Maybe for somebody it's good morning. And I'm Vladimir Kozlov from the High School of Economics, Program Population and Development. And today I will give you a short lecture about the global cities in the time of demographic challenges. And it will be, a really brief observation of the situation with the population of the global cities, what is happening. As you could see that there are, of course, some quick facts that we will just look at. And of course, globally, previously the population used to live in the rural areas. And for example, in 1950s, there were less than 1/3 of the world population living in the urban areas. And now, as you could see in the slide, more than half of the world population somehow residing in the urban areas. Of course, there is a question to the definition: what is urban area, what is rural area? But still, even if we use the universal definitions, more than the half of the world population, it's really a challenging situation. And if you take a look at the absolute figures, you will find that the population of the urban areas used to be less than 10% of the current world population. And now it's more than 4 billion. And actually, if you take a look at the projections, in 30 years, the population of urban areas will be more than 2/3 of the world's population. And here you could see the graph, how it looks like at the graph. And we will see that, well, for a long period of time, there was a sort of stagnation. Well, this period of observation started from the beginning of the 16th century. Yeah, there was a lot of stagnation. And then, since the beginning of the 19th century, the period that we could call the modern world, yeah, the period of the modern history and so on, the period of industrialization, we see the growth of the population, and since 50s generally, we will see that the growth was really significant. And here there are some links. I will use some data from the World Urbanization Prospect 2018. And while there are some really nice visualization, maps, graphs, and so on, I will show them, comment a bit. And also there are some historical data. The historical data are taken from the really interesting book, which is called The Growth of World Urban and Rural Population from 1920 till 2000s. It was published 50 years ago, generally, and there are some projections about the population for the end of the millennium and so on. And now they look like a bit naive because researchers, they could not generally project such a huge figures that are observed now. And that's why it's one of the challenges here, because this really rapid growth of the urban areas was a bit unpredictable. So, to sum up, what can we say? That the urbanization started recently. The rural population now is growing slowly. Mainly is growing slowly because in the developing countries, when there is a high natural increase in the rural population, the persons migrate to the cities, and the urban population has not so huge demographic growth, not so huge natural increase, but it has a huge demographic growth because of the migration from the rural areas. And talking about the rural population, we can say that Africa and Asia are home of nearly 90% of the rural population. And India has the largest rural population, almost 1 billion, then China. China is already urbanized. And this population could be considered as the result of the future growth of the cities in the near decades. And now let's go to the visualization. Take a look at the map from 1960s. Here you can see, according to the color, that the darker is the color, the more intensive is urbanization. The darkest areas are United States of America and Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and also Northern Europe like Great Britain, United Kingdom, and Ireland and Scandinavian countries. And we can see that great urbanization, according to this map, was something higher than 55% of the population living in the cities, which is, yeah, really interesting and hardly comparable with the current situation. And if you take a look at the tropical Africa, you will find that, well, in these areas, less than 10% of the population were living in the cities. If you take a look at the India, if you take a look at China, you will find that, well, for these areas, less than 1/4 of the population was living in the urban areas. And it was not so far away, 60 years ago. And then, here you can see the comparison, short comparison of the 1950 and 1960. You can see that in 1950, well, in Africa, for example, there was something like 15% of the population living in the urban areas. And also what you can see from these maps, you can also distinguish the population living in big agglomerations. And big agglomerations at that time was a city higher than 20,000 of inhabitants. And you can see that, well, still in the Soviet Union, Latin America and so on, there was a significant number of the places when the population was living in the small agglomerations, less than 2,000 persons. So according to the modern conditions, we can say that, well, even among this urban population, a significant part was living in some cities which now we could hardly call the cities. So, then a few projections you can see. Here you can see 1980s as it was visualized in 1969, and they made generally the number of the multi-million cities. Multi-million cities is the cities with the population more than 1 million. And here, of course, they expected that in less developed millions there will be more than 30 multi-million cities. But soon we will see, yeah, in this case, multi-million cities are not more than 1 million, but more than 2.5 million. Soon you will see that these projections were not fulfilled. Yeah, and especially in 1970s, the urban growth rate was really high. I'd rather call it unpredictable high. So here it is. This is the map, and this map shows us the growth rates of the cities. The green ones, the green rounds, the green spheres, they demonstrate us the cities with the growth rate less than 1% per year, and the red ones higher than 5%. If you take a look at Africa, at the Gulf countries, at the biggest Chinese cities, and also if you take a look at the cities in India, in Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on, in Brazil, for example, Mexico, you can find that, well, from the period of 70s till 90s, the growth rates of these cities were 5% and more. Of course, it wasn't just the natural increase, but still generally, the natural increase even for the urban population in these territories was huge. But mainly this is the situation of absorption of the rural population, really high rates. And of course, the infrastructure couldn't be developed so fast in this case. And already in 70s and 80s and 90s, the problems of slums and the problems of the under construction of the housing, the problem of the underdeveloped city infrastructure, roads, electricity, and public goods provision was already really acute and really widespread in the development world. So take a look at this groups. Then 1990s, 2018. You see that still there is a huge growth. There is a huge growth of Chinese cities. The Chinese urbanization is high, as you could see. Now almost 2/3 of the Chinese population is living in the urban areas, and it was due to the really rapid economic growth in China. They needed much more labor force, and you see that the persons were coming to Chinese cities, and the growth was tremendous. Also, the new Gulf countries, capitals were growing really fast. In Africa, due to the huge natural increase of the population, it's still huge growth rates. And also you'll see that even in the United States of America, there was a growth of so-called new megapolises, the cities which were built in the southeastern part of the United States, and they generally attracted the persons from the northern parts of the USA. And there was a really huge internal migration, and also some external migration and so on. And also in this map, you can see the city population in 2018. Yeah, if you see the quadratic quadratic sign and so on, it means that the city had the population more than 10 million, which is of course tremendous. There you can see some projections. According to these projections, you see that some of the cities are already declining. Yeah, it means that they are already saturated by the population from the rural areas, maybe saturated by the migrants and so on, and now the natural increase there is negative, and they will lose some of their population and so on. But still, generally in Africa and in some Indian and South Asian cities, you find that the growth will not be, of course, not so tremendous than more than 5% per year, but still really significant, something like 3 or between 3 and 5, which also creates the challenges for the city infrastructure. And yeah, as we already discussed, as a result of the urbanization, now we have more than 4 billion people living in the cities. And Asia still is much less urbanized than most of the other regions. But still it is a home to more than half of the world's urban population. In Europe and in Africa, there is 13% of the urban population, and the tendencies are really different. As in Europe, we could expect the stagnation in the absolute figures, and in the relative figures, due to the growth of the world population and the stagnation of the European population, we can expect that the cities will not grow, and the Europe will generally lose the leading positions. While in Africa, the percentage of urban population will be growing, the absolute numbers will be growing as well, and actually the role of Africa in the world urban population will grow. And in this case, of course, for the management and for the government of the African cities, it will be a really huge challenge how they will deal with this growth and so on. And of course, we can expect that such a huge amounts of the labor force coming to the labor market, well, it's also a challenge. You should create enough working places for them. The supply should be enough for this great common demand. And also, if you take a look at the structure of the cities, well, it's a bit different from the situation that was observed 50 or 60 years ago, when the researchers and the officials were interested in the population living in the agglomeration with their residents more than 20,000 and less than 20,000. Now, for example, we can see that the cutoff, the threshold, could be 500,000. So, for example, we can say that close to half of the world's urban dwellers reside in settlements with fewer than 500,000 inhabitants, and around 1 in 8 live in megacities with more than 10 million inhabitants each. And the number of these megacities will grow. And by 2030, the world is projected to have 43 megacities, and most of them will be in developing regions. And this is just the population of the cities with more than with more than 10 million inhabitants. And if you take a look at the population living in the cities with 5 million inhabitants or 1 million inhabitants, that's a tremendous number. And for example, if we take a look at the current situation, we can say that Tokyo is the world's largest city with an agglomeration of 37 million inhabitants. On the second place, there is Delhi, almost 40 million. Shanghai is about 25-26 million. Then Mexico City and Sao Paulo. Maybe 20 years ago, they were the leaders. Yeah, they were just standing after Tokyo in this hierarchy, and they had a population of 22 million inhabitants now. And of course, we are talking about agglomerations, not like the big Mexico or not big Delhi or big Cairo and so on. If you take a look at the big agglomerations, well, it could be more than 30 million. Yeah, of course, you know that this is still the administrative approach to what is called agglomeration. But here is the United Nations approach and United Nations methodology used, and we can be based on it. And in the cities like Cairo, Mumbai, Beijing, and Dhaka, the population is 20 million persons. And also, when we talk about the most of the cities in the developing areas, we can see that these are more or less rough estimations. So we don't know the exact population of the slums, for example, or exact population of the specific areas of the cities and so on. So in this case, we should say that maybe in reality, the population is a bit higher than these 20 million inhabitants. So maybe in Delhi, the population is almost the same as in Tokyo, or in Shanghai, it's almost the same as in current Delhi. So, well, maybe these largest cities are even larger in reality. And if you take a look at the projections, which are not in this slide, but still I can comment, for 2015, the leading agglomeration will be Mumbai, and the specialists expect 42 million persons living there. For Delhi, it will be 36, and Dhaka will be in the second place with 35. And you can see that all these big cities are situated in the South Asian region. And, well, it could be Calcutta on the fourth place, but, well, the scholars and the specialists, they have the strong debate if the Calcutta could be in the first place, and if the Calcutta could be even in the top 5, because now, as you could see from the map, the highest growth is not only in the Asia, even not only in the Southern Asia, but in Africa. So, according to the certain projections, United Nations projections, Kinshasa and Lagos could be in top 5, which will be a really great pressure on their system of their infrastructure, transportation system, public goods system, and so on. Tokyo, the former leader, well, there's no more the leader, it will be maybe on the place 6 or 7 or something like this. And also from the South Asian cities, Karachi will come to top 10, and New York City and Mexico City will generally keep their position in top 10. And that's how the situation is changing. How the situation is changing. And as far as we're speaking about the situation in sub-Saharan Africa, we should say that, well, it's not only Lagos and Kinshasa, but also we can expect Khartoum and Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Mombasa, among the cities with the highest growth rates. And actually, we can have just the really modest estimations of the population of these African megacities, because in reality, maybe they could have the population like 50 million and so on. Then, let's take a look at the country urbanization in the relative figures since 1970s. And the maps I'm going to show you, they demonstrate the share of the urban population in the country, and also you will see the megacities there. The blue ones will be the megacities with the population higher than 1 million, and big red ones, big red points. This is the megacities with the population more than 10 millions. Yeah, take a look at 1970 on the eve of the rapid urbanization. Well, we will see. You see that, of course, the leaders in urbanization is Australia and New Zealand. Already 80% living in the urban areas, but Africa, India, China, they show the population of the 20% in urban areas and less. And if you take a look at the megacities, you will find them in Japan, and it is New York, and that's all actually. Normal cities higher than 10 million. Then 1990, 20 years later. And you see that already Los Angeles and already Mexico City are among the 10 million megacities. Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo, also Mumbai and Dhaka and Seoul as well. And in China there are still no megacities, but let's take a look at the current situation, 2010. Generally, the whole China and almost the whole India, according to this map, is just a chain of the megacities with the population of the more than 1 million. And among the 10 millions, you find also Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Manila, Jakarta, Bangkok, and much more cities in Latin America, like Lima, and also Kinshasa and Lagos are really close to 10 millions. Karachi is visible here, and New Delhi, and so on. So you see how the situation is changing, and in Europe you can see that Paris, Moscow, Istanbul have the population of 10 millions, but actually in the European cities and Northern American cities, you can see that the infrastructure is already developed, but the situation with transportation in Lagos or in Kinshasa as well as in Dhaka is really dramatic. It means that while in these cities the population is living, but we can hardly call it real urbanization. It looks like the artificial urbanization, when the persons are living in the cities, but they don't live in their real rural conditions. They don't have the really good except raw public goods like transportation and even sanitation, sewage, water pipes, and so on. And from the projections, you see that the population of the cities will still grow, and well, the city management had something to do with it, have to redistribute the budgets, and so on. Yeah, take a look. This is a projection, and according to the projection, we will see that the number of cities billionaires will keep growing, and who knows if it could be even higher. Yeah, for example, here you see already Dar es Salaam, you can already the capital of Angola, and so on. And generally, Angola has one of the lowest quality of the rural life now, and urban life as well, regardless the oil production and regardless the really huge deficit of the budget because of the oil export and so on. So you can generally just imagine what happens if the population of the capital of Angola will be higher than 10 million. If now there are really huge problems which are not solved with infrastructure and with some basic needs like sewage, for example, and drinking water. So, now what can we say about near future? In the near future, well, we can expect 2.5 billion of the world urban population additional. And almost 90% of this growth happen in Asia or in Africa. And if you take a look at the drivers, we can say that the growth of urban population is still driven by the overall population increase in Asia and Africa, and by the upward shift in the percentage living in the urban areas. And let's take a look at more case studies from the countries. So, for example, maybe you know that just 3 countries, India, China, and Nigeria, as the African leader, together expected to account for 35% of the growth in the world's urban population between 2018 and 2015. And India is projected to add more than 400 million to the number of urban dwellers. China, 2050 million. You can see what will happen in China, yeah, because in China there is not so huge growth of the population, and rural area dwellers are generally growing not so fast. So China will be over-urbanized really soon. And it could be maybe the problems of the abandonment of some of the rural areas, which is happening in Europe, for example, and which happens in Japan, that was really highly urbanized and demonstrated the really huge urbanization levels 50 years ago and so on. And now you can find that, well, it's over-urbanized, but there is almost no rural population and so on. And in Nigeria, well, we could expect additional almost 200 million dwellers of the cities. And here you can see that as far as we started to talk about the pioneers of modern urbanization, we should talk about the United States of America. Here it is. And you see that the half of the United States population started to live in the rural areas before the urban areas before the Second World War. So they urbanized really quickly, and you could see it from the map in the very beginning of this talk. And here there are most populous US cities since 1790. We started from this year, as generally all the population history of the United States, also demography started from this year, because this is the year of the first census. But what you can see that New York was the leader. Then, there were several periods of time when Chicago was growing. Chicago was growing really fast, and for some periods of time in the early 2000s, early 90s, the Chicago had the number of dwellers almost as huge as in New York, but then the growth of Chicago generally stagnated, stopped, and so on. And now, for example, if you take a look at Los Angeles demonstrated even huger population. And generally, you can look at this graph, you can look at this visualization if you wish later, yeah, because it's also possible, and you will find the growth and decline of the cities of the let's say, old urbanization areas. Then, here you can see the trends of urbanization in some selected regions. And you see that, well, for the countries like Eastern Asia, Southeastern Asia, and even the Sub-Saharan Africa, it took really short period of time for really rapid urbanization. Yeah, because the length of this line in all of the cases demonstrates the length of the observed period. And now you see that still generally the highest number of persons living in the rural areas are in Africa and South Asia, but the progress is tremendous. While on the more developed regions, we already observed a sort of plateau. And here you can find the levels and trends of urbanization in selected countries. Here you can see China, which is still remains growing as an urbanized society. The same is with Brazil. Well, there are some questions to the data from Indonesia. In Ethiopia, for example, there is a huge urbanization, but still there is a large number of persons living in the rural area, so like a big reserves. And also in India, there is not a huge growth, and in Egypt, it looks like that there is a stagnation of the growth, which could be explained by several reasons, including also the external migration from the cities and so on. And also we can find some more interesting examples. Yeah, if we take a look at the Nigeria, for example, or Bangladesh, or Pakistan, there are other cities with a really huge growth of the population in the urban areas. What we will find? Let's take a look. And let's take a look at the number of the persons living in the cities with a population more than 5 million, for example, in these cities. Yeah, so for example, we take a look at the Bangladesh. We could just use this United Nations data source. We will find that nowadays, in Bangladesh, there is one city higher than 10 million and one city higher than 1 million. But in 2030, in Bangladesh, there will be Dhaka, one city with a population more than 10 million. There will be another city with a population more than 5 million, and 4 other cities with a population more than 1 million. If we take a look at the Nigeria, what will happen? For Nigeria, now we have one city, Lagos, with a population more than 10 million, and 9 cities with a population more than 1 million. But in 2013, there will be 20 cities in Nigeria with a population more than 1 million, and 2 cities with a population more than 5 million. Nowadays there are 10 cities, so the number of cities will double. And if we take a look at the Pakistan, for example, when you see there is a mega city Karachi, and now there are not only Karachi but Lahore with a population that is 10 million, and generally the total number of the cities with a population more than 1 billion is 10 in Pakistan. Generally nothing will change in 2030. There will be 11 cities with a population with 1 million in Pakistan, but the number of inhabitants there will be much huger. For example, Karachi could come to top 5, as we already discussed, of the world cities. And in the smaller countries like like for example Ghana, which is much smaller than previous ones. Nowadays, there are 2 cities with a population more than 1 million, and it will be 3. But the number of inhabitants of these cities will be twice more. So that's how the situation is going on. How the situation is going on in the world. And yeah, you can generally do the same procedures by yourself, follow these links and so on. Okay, and some cities and some countries are experiencing the population decline in recent years. And well, of course, we know that the cities are the main drivers of innovation, new ideas, and the industrial growth and so on. But the main question is this growth of the population and if this development of the cities is considered to be sustainable? If we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, we will find that the goal number 11 is devoted to so-called sustainable cities and communities. And we can see what is included in it. And generally, the United Nations thinks that as the world continues to urbanize, the sustainable development depends increasingly on the successful management of urban growth. So, and in low-income and low-middle-income countries, the successful management of urban growth is becoming really crucial, because otherwise we see the cities with friendly environment, with the lack of the transport, high criminal rates, and so on. So the quality of life in the cities is really poor, and in this case it couldn't be called the urban areas. They are genuinely rural areas living in the surrounding of some genuinely skyscrapers or something like this. And of course, urban growth is closely related to 3 dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. And genuinely, if the urbanization is well managed and well governed, and genuinely the population trends are more or less clear for the management and understandable. It means not only the growth of the population, but genuinely the changing structures of the population, the number of the vulnerable group within the population, and the expected number of new migrants coming to the city. All of this is called the understanding of population trends. Well, in these cases, well, the urbanization could be sustainable. Also, it's important to be focused on the needs of urban poor and other vulnerable groups, and their requirements and their genuine needs could be somehow connected with housing, education, healthcare, decent work, and safe environment, like the low levels of pollution, the low criminal rates, and the better transportation development, and so on. And what are the challenges for the sustainability? The challenges are following. Almost 1 billion of persons live in slums, and most of these slums are in Eastern and Southeastern Asia. And in Africa, we could also expect the growing number of persons living in slums, because there are really huge rate of urbanization and really low levels of the city management development. And also, we should say that, of course, cities are really high energy consuming. And the world cities occupy just 3% of the Earth's land, but they account for 60 to 80% of the energy consumption and 75% of carbon emissions. So, of course, the pollution is coming from the cities. It is not only the vehicles; it's also the industrial production and so on. And what can we say there? urbanization has exerted pressure on fresh water supplies, sewage, living environment, and public health. And for example, in 2016, 90% of urban dwellers have been breathing unsafe air, resulting in more than 4 million deaths due to the ambient air pollution. And it is mainly the postponed mortality and morbidity and so on. We could expect in the near future really splash of the growth of this air pollution related diseases. And the problem is that more than half of the global urban population is exposed to air pollution levels, at least 2.5 times higher than the safety standards. So it's not 50%, it's not 25%, even not 75% high. It's 2.5% high, which leads to the really huge problems with health, to lung cancer, to heart diseases, cardiovascular diseases, and kidney problems, and of course, our respiratory problems. And the Sustainable Development Goals, if we want to be really bureaucratic and follow these issues, we can say that Sustainable Development Goals 11, and the first goal is to ensure access to all adequate, safe and affordable housing and basic services and upgrade slums, which is generally a really ambitious goal. Yeah, because with the growth of the urbanization, 90% of which is effective urbanization, we could expect that the growth of slums will be high. So in this case, the city management should play a really huge role in this case. And talking about all the sustainable development goals, we should say that the 11th ones, when we deal with the cities, is one of the most challenging. It's one of the most difficult for realization. Then, by 2013, in 11 years, according to the Sustainable Development Goals, what is the solution for this crisis? We'll talk about it a bit later, and generally one of the solutions is try to follow these goals. Of course, there is a question if we can fulfill them, but we could try to follow them. And we should say that in case of the European and United States urbanizations, all these problems were visible, and they have the same problems in England, for example, in the United States, in Europe, as happened now in Africa and South Asia and so on. But these problems are solved now, so in this case we are looking forward to the solution of these problems in developing countries. And generally, one of the problems which face the development world now, and it wasn't so widespread within the industrialization of the developed countries, while the population growth was not so huge in Europe as it is in Africa and in South Asia. And this is a really great challenge. And one of the solutions of this crisis is family planning programs, which are, for example, extremely successful in Bangladesh or in China and so on. So in this case, we could expect that these sustainable development goals will be, I suppose, almost fulfilled in the countries like Bangladesh or the majority of the Indian countries in the Thailand, Vietnam and China, for example. But in Pakistan and in the other Indian states, there are still questions about the solution of them. I suppose that in Brazil and in Mexico, the sustainable development goals will be more or less fulfilled, but in Africa and in some Middle East countries, not Gulf countries, but Middle East, they are still under the debate. So, the sustainable transport system. The sustainable transport system, it's really important because the public transportation reduces the air pollution, and also when we're talking about the road safety, we should understand that the traffic accidents in the developing countries now are becoming really widespread. One of the major causes of death, which also used to be widespread in the developing countries, but now the situation is solved, and I suppose it will be solved in the developing countries as well. But it's also the challenge for the city management, because in some cases if you need to build more road and more transportation routes, you have to demolish the previous built buildings and so on. So you have to change the whole environment. You have to destroy the slums and so on. And in this case, well, this is a station of negotiations, compensations, and so on. Then, 2030. Sustainable urbanization, sustainable human settlement planning and management in all the countries. That's what I already mentioned. Yeah, the city management should be already well trained and so on. World's cultural and natural heritage within the rural, not only within the rural areas but within the urban areas. There's something like the green cities, parks, and so on, which is a nice solution, but of course a challenge. Well, 2030, the reduce of the number of deaths because of the pollution and so on, which is a great challenge, but also maybe possible. The reduce of the per capita environmental impact of the cities. It could be done by the improvement of the city energy system and by fighting with the losses in different electricity networks and so on. And access to public spaces, and particular for the women and children with disabilities and the older persons and so on. Well, generally, for some cities it looks like the fantastic, but for the other cities, for example, for the cities of Turkey or for the cities of China and so on, it looks like the goal which could be reached in 11 years. In some Latin American cities like Mexico or something like this. Why not? Well, you see that, in my opinion, I cannot say that this Sustainable Development Goals 11 could be universal for all the cities. It seems to me that there should be the hierarchy of priorities and the hierarchy of indicators, and while some of the cities could genuinely fulfill all of them, but the others could just stand on the course of this development. And yeah, these are Sustainable Development Goals A, B, and C. And they're just talking about their possibility of their ties between the city and the management of the city and so on. You can just look at it, and you can also say that, well, C, for example, there is a good approach to the international cooperation, and yeah, of course, this is also the answer of the question about the solution of the crisis. Yeah, because the international corporations could solve it, and in this case, local materials, local labor force, and the training of the local management could be the solution, and so on. And the same situation is this with the disaster risk reduction, because we shouldn't forget that the natural disasters like earthquakes, or floods, or hurricanes, or cyclones in the cities are still generally really dangerous, and especially if the environment is not safe, and especially the situation with slums. And you can say that it's not only the situation of the developing countries like, for example, India or Bangladesh, but also in the developed countries. The natural disaster could play a great deal and so on. I suppose all of you remember New Orleans catastrophe with the flood and so on. And this is the city from the United States, one of the old urbanized countries with an experience on urbanization and infrastructure building, but yeah, there was not protection of the vulnerable groups and genuinely failure of their management system, disaster management system, and so on. And what about the demographic factors of the cities? Well, in case of mortality, we can say that epidemiological transition. In all of these situations, it was a period of challenge and then the period of fast improvements. For example, there was so-called the city penalty in Europe, in China, in India, in Northern America. And it was because of the infection diseases, and as the population of the cities were living too close to each other with a very huge population density, the infection diseases were really dangerous there, and the life expectancy in the cities were far less than in the countryside. But then, after the epidemiological transition, the city borrowed new technologies. They started to clean water, they built sewages, and they improved some systems of hospitals and so on. And the situation of the city, the infection diseases now is much better than in the countryside. Another situation is there are further stages of the epidemiological transition, where the not infection diseases are the major threats for the population, but the so-called civilization diseases, like the effects of air pollution. And we will see that air pollution is responsible for the premature mortality in Asia in the levels of high urbanization. Also, there is a problem of the traffic accidents and the other accidents like homicides, suicides, and so on, because even in traditional societies in the rural areas, the persons were more or less controlled by their communities, but not in the cities. And there is a high risk of deviations and so on. And new infection risk like AIDS and tuberculosis is widespread in the cities because of the higher density and the change of the social networks and so on. And there are some case studies that in China, for example, the achieving air pollution standards would yield much greater health improvements than, for example, recommended 25 improvement in systolic hypertension controls and 30% reduction of the smoking. So the air pollution in China and now in India, it's a huge problem, and we could expect a really huge cardiovascular diseases because of it with the aging of the population. So now, for example, the city management could just try to improve the system of the hospital, system of the cardiovascular disease prevention. And of course, try to do something with the air pollution. Try to do something with the burning of the fossils, coal and so on, with private transport. And something like that particulate matters PM, yeah, in China, India, Thailand, Bangladesh is so huge that, well, it could be one of the reasons for acute and well, really nasty lung cancers. Yeah, because of PM and sulfur oxides and so on. So in this case, this situation is even more challenging than the situation with cardiovascular disease, because it could improve the healthcare management to control the cardiovascular diseases, because the cardiovascular revolution already took place. You know what to do, you know what cheap and effective and efficient drugs you could use, you know the surgical preventions, what should be done, and so on. But for cancer, the cancer transition is just started, and there is not clear what to do to cure cancers, to prevent it, and so on. And well, the huge air pollution has a really strong correlation with cancer as well. In case of fertility, well, there are positive examples because the demographic transition starts from the cities. Well, in all the cities, no, the cohort fertility is going down, and in Africa as well. Even in the cities with the stalling demographic transition, the fertility drops in the cities, but then suddenly in several cohorts, after 1 or 2 generations, you realize that it's too low, because well, if the cities are not sustainable, they don't create the incentives for the childbearing and child rearing. And in Indian and Chinese cities now the fertility is close to 1, which is much lower than in the majority of the European and North American cities. Yeah, for example, in Calcutta, this is the lowest low level and the lowest in India. And in Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, and even Hong Kong, which is already more or less sustainable, The fertility rates are less than one child per woman, which is really low. And this is this demonstrates a really huge probability of the rapid aging of the population. So, in these cases, new facilities for the children and for the older population, for the elderly, should be created in the cities. And now we go back to the Sustainable Development Goals and realize how important they are. Then, a few words about internal migration. As we already told, the urbanization uh, is in such a rapid pace because of the huge internal migration, and the persons come into the big cities in developing countries. What they see the lack of the public goods, the lack of the labor market, and the situation that the housing markets are prepared. So in this case, if this situation, if these challenges are not solved, if these questions are not solved, well, you could expect not the real urbanizations, but the slum growth. And also, I should say that, well, the challenges for Africa are more severe than they used to be for Asia and for Latin America, because the social systems and economic growth is not huge as it used to be in Asia and in Latin America. Also, the demographic transition is still in most of the African countries. There is not such a huge growth of life expectancy, and there is not such a significant decline of total fertility rates and so on. It means that the African urbanization will create even more challenges and even more requests to the quality of the their city management and so on. And also, if you take a look at the quality of life indexes here, because there are plenty of indexes, take a look at the two of them. We generally look at different criteria of the quality of life, like the criminal rate, prices, salaries, the quality of housings, and so on. And these are the maps. These are the maps of the NIMBY indicator. Take a look. The European cities are more or less good in comparison with African, but also there are some exceptions. Take a look at Seoul or Tokyo or Singapore, and the cities like Islamabad in Pakistan and so on. They demonstrate quite a huge standards of living. The Gulf countries, Lebanon capitals and so on, and Hong Kong, well, they're quite good. While, for example, in Mumbai, Shanghai, Cairo, Lagos, Jakarta, the situation is much worse. And here you can see the situation in Latin America, when Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo are still underdeveloped, but the Mexico City are a bit improving. And this is the same improvements as in Jamaica and the United States. But of course there are in Buenos Aires as well, but of course there are some problematic cases like Caracas or Lima. So, well, they still have something to do to develop. And if you take a look at the Mercer rating, you will find that, well, the best cities to live in are situated in Austria, Germany, or Switzerland, also in Canada or New Zealand, and in some North European cities like North European countries like Denmark or Sweden and so on. But generally the cities from the developing countries, they should just try to get these high standards, and don't forget that even in developing countries urbanization wasn't so smooth. There are also the challenges, but you see, with the better management, you can solve all these problems of the population and come to the more sustainable development. And that's all for the present, and this is the end of the lecture. Thank you very much for your questions. Also, so thank you very much for your attendance, and thank you very much for listening. And now, please feel free to answer me the questions, and I'll be really happy to answer them. Yes, thank you as well. Well, it looks like that everything is clear. And here I should say that there is no single solution of the crisis. There should be the complex solution. And yeah, I'm just inviting you to enter the high school of economics. And I suppose you could solve all these problems of the urbanization, all the challenges of the global cities, and so on. Thank you very much, and bye.